Duncan Wood is director of the Wilson Center's Mexico Institute. He joins us today to talk about energy issues and climate issues between the United States and Mexico. Duncan, welcome back. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, John. Nice to be here.
Let me ask you before we dive into the subject matter. Just interviewed your colleague, Chris Wilson, asked him the same question. I want to hear your take on this. Is just characterizing the current state of relations after the tumult of the early days of the Trump administration.
Yeah, I think we're in a very, very interesting moment in the sense that we've had a chaotic couple of weeks in the bilateral relationship. There's been the question of the canceled visit by the Mexican president. There's been the tweets from the US president. There's been the transcript of the conversation, telephone conversation between the two presidents. There's been a clamming up on the part of the two administrations, which I think is actually a positive thing in some ways. But there is also a very nationalistic response coming from Mexican society. That is drawing certain reactions on this side of the border from US politicians, US businesses, groups in society who are very concerned that if all of this goes wrong, then perhaps we'll lose not only our second most important trade partner in terms of exports, but also the deep integration that we've seen on a wide range of issues, including security, and of course, the issue we're about to talk about, energy.
Well, this piece that you've written, Charting a New Course, Policy Options for the Next Stage in U.S.-Mexico Relations on Climate and Energy in this particular case. I guess before we talk about some recommendations that you're making, what's the current picture look like on the level of cooperation on these issues?
So I always like to go back to an issue that you and I have talked about on a number of occasions, which is the Mexican energy reform, which was passed in 2013. It makes sense to talk about that just a little bit because it's such a game changer. It's a game changer for Mexico, but it was a game changer in the bilateral energy relationship. All of a sudden, things became possible to talk about, to plan collaboratively that just simply were not possible before. And so what we've seen is we've seen the construction of pipelines going south to Mexico to take US natural gas, all of which is fueling Mexican business and Mexican competitiveness. We have seen increased exports of refined products from the United States to Mexico as Mexico has liberalized its gasoline markets, for example. We've also seen US firms investing in Mexican oil and gas exploration. And you know, the most impactful of these was seen in December of last year, where we saw US and other countries' firms investing in the deep waters of the Gulf of Mexico. So that's all a very positive thing. Then we have to say that what we've seen in terms of the business relationship on energy has been matched by a diplomatic relationship on energy. Over the last few years, we've seen the energy ministers of the three North American countries coming together on a regular basis, coming up with agreements, agreeing to work together on putting together plans and maps for the future of North American energy integration. And all of that, as I said before, was absolutely impossible prior to the energy reform of 2013. So we've actually, coming into 2017, we're in an extraordinary moment where there are opportunities, there are possibilities that were undreamt of before. And now all of a sudden, I think we're at a moment where we're saying, well, can we actually take advantage and reap the rewards of those opportunities?
So the table is set. What are you recommending?
Well, so what I've done here in this paper is to actually look at what the energy priorities are for the Trump administration as they were outlined on the campaign trail. And sort of one of the first things that they talked about a lot was the need for the United States to import oil from friendly suppliers rather than countries whose interests are antagonistic to those of the United States. And an obvious point here is that Mexico has been an incredibly friendly country to the United States. Now, Mexico's oil production has been declining in recent years, and so they've been exporting less oil to the United States. My point here is that the United States and Mexico should work together on trying to reinforce the success of the Mexican energy reform so that that production goes up, so the United States has a safe and secure and reliable source of oil. The second point that I make is to do with building infrastructure. And infrastructure between the two countries, we've talked a lot about roads and border crossings, of course, the very controversial conversation over the wall. But what I'd like to see is I'd like to see more oil and gas pipelines. I'd like to see more electricity transmission going back and forth across the border. Let's even talk about planning out refining capacity on a regional level so that it actually takes place where it's most needed and where it makes most sense to do it. There's an intriguing idea, for example, from the Mexican government that perhaps they could build an electricity transmission line across northern Mexico to carry electrons that are produced in Texas, for example, from wind energy, across northern Mexico and then up into California. So you're taking Texan electrons to California through Mexico. That would be an extraordinary example of the integration of these two countries. Third issue that I talk about, and this is one that was very, very important for the Trump campaign, is the question of regulatory efficiency, or as deregulation. And both the United States and Mexico have identified that they actually want to make their regulatory systems more efficient. They want to take away some of the paperwork that's involved that really does slow down business without compromising safety and security and environmental protection, of course. And I think there's a very interesting conversation that can be had on that issue moving ahead. So if we put all these things together, then we see that in fact there's a really, really vibrant agenda that is possible to pursue at this point in time.
What is your sense of the prospects? You clearly looked at what the Trump administration was saying during its campaign season and matched your recommendations to their priorities. What about on the legislative side of the agenda? Are there people in Congress who will be on board for these types of initiatives?
Yeah, I mean, you think about the folks, of course, who represent districts in Texas.
Love to send that electricity to California.
Absolutely, they'd love to do that. They'd also like to explore the possibility of selling their electricity to a wider market in Mexico. All the folks who produce natural gas, remember that natural gas has been a boom product for the United States over the past 5 years or so. The fastest growing market for US natural gas is Mexico. So why not build more infrastructure to get it down there? And a lot of people will depend on that growth of natural gas for jobs and for prosperity. There's a lot of politicians who'd be interested in seeing that happen as well.
And how does the potential for a renegotiated NAFTA fit into this?
Right. So there's two major aspects. The first one is that if the negotiations go wrong and Mexico's economy is negatively impacted by this, then the demand in Mexico for natural gas and for electricity is going to go down. Mm-hmm. And that's something that would adversely affect US interests. The second point is perhaps more interesting and more important, and that is that under NAFTA, it has been identified that although energy was not part of the original deal, because at the time Mexico had a closed system, written into the text of NAFTA is a clause which says that if Mexico was to at some point open up its energy sector, then the energy sector would be covered by the rules of NAFTA, including investor protections. That's something that matters a great deal to all of those US firms who are currently engaged in investing in Mexican oil and gas exploration. They do not want to see their investor protections weakened by an abrogation of NAFTA. So that's something that is of enormous importance to US oil companies. In fact, the American Petroleum Institute has issued statements on that recently, emphasizing their concern over this particular issue.
Duncan, this report we've been referencing, is it available online?
It's available online, yes, like all of our stuff, free for the public. One of the reasons why we want to do these videos is so that we can actually provide a little taster of what's in these documents and encourage people to go and explore more. We'll be taking this out on the road as well, both across the United States and, of course, in Mexico. And we're trying to get
Ticketmaster?
Ticketmaster, yeah. I know that there will be a premium on that, but we can always come to some kind of arrangement.
There's always a secondary market. Duncan, thanks for joining us.
Thanks a lot, John.